Hello and welcome to another episode of Housing Matters. As always, I am your host, Corey Jalseth. Well, it's just about that time. Legislative session 2025 getting ready to kick off. And my guest today is State Representative Andrew Barkis, who just after session ended at the end of last year, RHA has been sitting down with Representative Barkis throughout the year to help draft various pieces of housing legislation, and we've had some input and some help from some of our coalition partners. So my interview with him today, we talk a little bit about how that legislation has progressed and how the final bills really came out looking and how he hopes to present those in session. We also talk about some of the items that he would like to accomplish as the ranking member on the Transportation Committee. And we just unpack the November election a little bit and his general outlook on session. So please enjoy my interview with Representative Andrew Barkis. Well, Representative Barkis, welcome back to Housing Matters. I really appreciate you taking the time. We spoke last time almost exactly a year ago. It was the first day of session last year.
Gosh,
I know, what a session. But I want to invite you back and talk a little bit about this upcoming legislative session and some of the bills that RHA has been working with you on since the end of last session, really, at March timeframe. And just hear a little bit about those, but also kind of how you're feeling about the election and what you are looking forward to on Transportation Committee and all that upcoming. But I wanted to start for those listeners who don't know what your business is outside of being a state representative. What is it that you do that really gives you an inside track to the housing industry?
Sure. Well, welcome to my business. It's glad to have you down here in beautiful Lacey on a nice cold morning. I have been in the industry of property management for over 30 years now. It's kind of hard to believe. Started, back late 80s when I was going to Seattle University and managing a small apartment in Seattle. Went to work for that company for years. Went to Spokane, worked for a large company over there, managed all sorts of stuff. Came back here in the late 90s and started with a little property management company doing single family management here in Lacey. And over the course of all these years, ended up buying the company and growing the company into one of the largest single family providers here in the region. And so it gives me a unique perspective from day one. First day I walked in the legislature in 2016, immediately started working on landlord-tenant issues and realized that there really wasn't anybody in the legislature that had the breadth of knowledge and background. So it's been hugely important to be able to bring that to the conversation, especially over the last several years. We've just seen so many policies around landlord-tenant law, and also to educate my colleagues, on both sides of the aisle. We've been fortunate over the last several years that more people within the housing industry, more experts have joined the legislature. So it's made my job a little bit easier to have, some people to delegate to and to work with that understand what it is that we do. So it's been pretty cool. It's getting more and more challenging, every session, as we know. But certainly, I don't think we would be where we are today if we didn't have that knowledge base working in policy.
Absolutely. So that kind of brings me to the next question. How are you and your fellow caucus members, how are you guys kind of feeling after all the dust has settled from the November election?
Well, not great. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
It's tough. Washington State is a tough state to be a Republican. It's a tough state to kind of navigate through in these election cycles. We've had a series, back to back, where we've just had really challenging cycles, and unfortunately, it's the issues that we deal with. But we have had phenomenal candidates. We have had from the top down great candidates working very hard, but at the end, it comes down to how you fund your campaigns, and it's a 10-to-1 advantage. So it's really difficult to navigate the whole process. So we saw that Washington State is the only state in the union that decided it wanted to move a little further left.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to have an impact in policy. We're already seeing this. We'll talk a little more about what's coming up, but I'm a little concerned about that. I know that there are still great people on both sides of the aisle that want to find that common ground, that middle. I think it's going to get tougher to do that. And again, we just continue the 40-year reign of single party control here in Washington State, which is just not good. You have to have that balance. So we're going to have to keep working harder to try to achieve that balance in the future.
I couldn't agree more. But so with all that being said, what are you most excited to try and accomplish in 2025, apart from housing stuff, which we'll get to a little later on? But what has you excited about getting back into session and getting back to work?
Well, I don't know if excited is the right word. This is my fifth session. Not my fifth session, my fifth term.
Right.
I think that I always do get, I guess you could say I get excited. I mean, I really enjoy being in session. It is difficult. It's just brutal, but it is, where everything kind of, where I thrive, in that environment of trying to accomplish different things. I think that, I always say that through, adversity comes the best opportunities.
Absolutely.
And we're definitely in an adverse time here, both with what we're hearing as far as the budget dilemma that has been created, and also the change in members in the majority's caucus. It's going to put forth a lot of things that I think are bad policy. But I also know that there's a lot of members in the majority that I don't think will agree with the agenda that's being put forth. So there's opportunity to work together. So I'm excited about continuing those relationships, finding new relationships, bringing coalitions together under common, a commonality. And I think we have the policy going in, from day one. We're going to have policy ready to go. In the housing front, I'm working on a lot of other things. Of course, I'm the ranking member on transportation.
Right.
So that budget is really challenging, but I think I bring a balance to that about talking about policies and priority. And at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. And so looking for those opportunities where people can come together will be what I bring to the process. And in finding the issues that are important that we can all agree upon to move that forward, while at the same time countering the bad stuff. So that's it's again that balance that we're going to have to see. But
Sure.
And there's a lot of policy. I mean, I've got my hands into a ton of stuff. So hopefully we'll have some success moving things forward.
Yeah, something just put into motion in Seattle from one of your bills on the co-living situation. Yeah. We spoke with Brandy Cruz about that earlier this week, and that's starting to kind of slowly trickle through all the cities across the state. So
that was pretty amazing. Proud accomplishment. I co-sponsor a lot of bills. I work primary on a lot of the bills, but in order to get them moving, the majority, you have to have a Democrat sponsor as most of these bills. And this was an interesting one because it was something that I had been, an idea that I'd been working on for a couple of years. And when I found out it was actually being done and what were the things that were preventing it, it is a great. When we look at the housing ladder, I mean, this is literally first, second rung of the ladder to create affordable and in many cases non-subsidized housing, which is fantastic. So the fact that we were able to get that policy gel together and through the whole process and passed and signed into law in one short session, probably one of my bigger accomplishments. I mean, that was a pretty amazing thing to get that done.
Yeah, very, very well done. And as you said, I think it'll really help with the supply, especially with the shortage of that type of affordable housing that we need.
Yeah.
You did speak already about you are the ranking member on Transportation Committee. What do you guys have coming up in transportation, you think?
So transportation, we've had a really good working relationship. The Chair Fye has been fantastic to work with. We have a great committee that we work together on policy and, of course, the budget. And over the last several years, we've passed unanimous budgets. We've worked through a lot of problems. But in that process, we also knew that as we look out into the future, especially in capital projects, that we were facing some significant shortfalls. We were facing some significant challenges because costs have increased exponentially. When you're looking at projects that just 2 years ago, you were in the process of bidding and getting going, and we appropriate X amount of dollars, and then a year later, it's 40, 50, 60, 100% increase. Really difficult to do that. And so what we're facing is we have some declining revenues, but we have increasing costs. So again, I say priorities. There is money within the transportation arena. We just saw in Washington State that the Climate Commitment Act, there was an initiative. I was very much in favor of doing away with that because it is a tax. and it costs the people of Washington State at the pump a significant amount, and it really doesn't have the effect on the climate that I believe is necessary or justified with what the cost is. But it is a revenue source. And we just heard for the last 6 months in the campaign to defeat it, which they did, that it is a revenue source to be used for transportation. So my job will be to bring people together and to say, look, we need to utilize that for other things other than what has been traditionally the model of that particular bucket of money. We're going to have to rearrange some things. We're going to have some hard conversations and say, is this the right thing to be doing today? Can we postpone this, bring these funds over here to continue? And I think one of the biggest things when you talk about projects, we have a lot of commitments to the people of Washington State to finish what we've started, right? We did packages years ago to build, and if you think up north, 405, 520, all these different things. These were put into place years ago. And we can't say to the people, hey, sorry, we're not going to finish those. We're not going to start this next phase. You paid for it, but we're not going to do that. I think that is sending the wrong message. Sure. So we're going to work through that. Policy-wise, I've got the second phase to my graffiti bill, which I think was a huge success, and people will really absolutely want their areas cleaned up. So we're seeing how that's going to play out. But it's not going to be without challenges. And starting day one when we get together on the budget, how this works out, what we're able to do. I'm nervous about the context of all the budgets and the talk that we're hearing right now about increasing revenue. That's taxes, that's fees, and that's more burden on the people of Washington State. And it's unfortunate we're in this situation because we're not in a bad economic time. We're not in a recession. We're not in a market crash. We're actually in a good time. The revenues have decreased a little bit. We don't have as big as surpluses, but we still have revenue. It's the spending side that has been so impactful, both on the operating budget, but also I would say that it's a lot of policy, a lot of regulatory things that have been enacted by the legislature, which have driven up the cost on these transportation projects. So we need to take a really hard look at removing those barriers, very similar to housing, right? Removing the barriers before we just throw more revenue at it and say we need to tax the people more to pay for stuff. You got to find out what got us here, right? First and foremost.
I guess it brings me to a follow-up question. Have you were talking about working with Representative Phi, but in conversations you've been having before session kicks off, do you think those on the other side of the aisle are ready to have some of those hard conversations about budgeting and right after the election's over, we have this upcoming budget deficit and all this. Yeah. Do you think they're ready to have some of those hard conversations?
I don't know if they're actually ready to have conversations on that line because the go-to for the majority is always to raise more money. It's always revenue first. And we've seen this on the news here in the last couple of days. The Speaker of the House and Majority Leader in the Senate, basically saying we need more revenue. We need to tax the wealthy. We need to tax business. We need to tax. But again, I will say, this is a spending issue, not a revenue issue. Another little thing that happened is, we went through COVID. It was a tough time in every aspect, but the state received billions of dollars of federal money. It was one-time money that came in, and we were saying, use it, save it, apply it where it needs to be, but do not create more programs, more things, because you're going to have what's called a bow wave. And that happened. All these things are in place. They had that one-time money, that source goes away, and now you've got to fund it because you've created another program. And so, we're seeing that with our education, the K through 12, and so many other areas. So it's shocking. It's actually absolutely shocking to me and to many that you look at the situation and, a month ago it was like $4 billion. Now I'm hearing $14 billion shortfall over the long term. How is that possible? I mean, how is that possible? In my time in the legislature, we have had over 25 billion in surpluses over the last 5, 6, 7 years, right? So it tells you that it's not, again, the revenue, it is the spending. And until they get spending under control, we're going to continue to have this problem. The other thing is, they're always going to threaten to cut all the things that we treasure, right? Parks, all the things that we know that are very important and that we've invested in are the first things on the cutting board. And so they'll put that out there. That's part of the negotiation. Well, if you don't want to cut this program, then we're going to have to increase this tax. And I think that those are going to be difficult decisions that they're going to have to make. And I know that there's many in their caucus that are not going to be happy about that, because many of the programs that are in place, their members put into place. So it's going to be interesting to watch them try to sort through it. I guarantee it's going to be a pretty good show.
Well, we'll be watching. A little bit going back to transportation. Have you talked or received an update on what the situation is with the ferries and all that? I know that I'm catching off guard maybe a little bit there.
No, I laugh because, it just falls in the same bucket.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, last year I ran a bill, and I called for the governor to declare a state of emergency for our ferry system, which he should have done. Because if the governor declares a state of emergency, he can wave his magic wand through executive order and remove barriers and regulations and permitting and everything else, and we can get on things very quickly. There are many examples of this. So I thought, well, if you can do it over here, you should do it for the ferry system. And the biggest thing is, and we could do a whole show on this. The governor in 2019 altered the course of the ferry system by going to this electrification, by doing all the things around his climate policies. It changed everything, right? And when it did that, it made it very difficult to get contracts and build what we were going to do. Two, the cost doubled. It just put us in a bad situation, and it just kept piling on year after year after year. Where we sit today is, last year we did a legislation just because we had a build in Washington clause, and we said, well, we better open it up because we only have 3 boat builders in Washington State. There are boat builders all throughout the nation.
Sure.
So we did that, but even in that legislation, we had to alter it because our regulations and environmental restrictions and everything else are so much more significant in Washington State than, say, California, which is shocking. But in the Gulf states, which is where a lot of ships are built, in the Gulf states. So we put that all out to bid. Out of the solicitations, there were like 14. Half of them just went away because of the requirements of the bid process. Others didn't want to participate. And we ended up with 3 prospects, 3 proposals. Those now have to be sorted to see if they can actually build. We were supposed to have all this in front of us prior to session starting so we can make decisions in the budget. We're now hearing we're not going to hear anything about that until May, June, July, possibly late summer. And the problem is, I know what we're going to hear. A, probably not going to be able to build it. B, the cost is going to be probably not double, but maybe triple what we're already facing. Yeah. And in the meantime, we have a system that's failing. We don't have any boats in reserve. We took a boat out of service in order to do a conversion to hybrid electric, right? We pushed back against that. We said, don't do it. This is not the time. Do the maintenance on it, keep the boat in service. They said, no, we're going to do this. We're going to go through it. It's going to take 6-8 months. We just were told here a couple months ago, it's not done. It's going to take another 6 to 8 months. And guess what? It's going to cost double what they projected. So that boat that's sitting there in dry dock going through this conversion, we're not going to see back in service until probably late summer. So, this system is so tenuous right now. Yeah. We don't have a lot of margins on it. So again, I'm going to probably be introducing that legislation. This incoming governor, Governor-elect Ferguson, actually ran on the platform that looked very similar to the legislation that I ran, because it was my legislation. And I'm going to hold him to it. We're going to hold him to it and say, look, if you're serious about fixing this problem, we got to almost start over and get on it quickly and just build boats and get them done as fast as we possibly can. We can always talk about electrification and all this other stuff later, but I will also piggyback that onto what I said before about priorities and reshifting funds. Those hundreds of millions of dollars that are dedicated into electrification could be used elsewhere now, where they're needed most. We can do the electrification down the road. We don't need to do that. It does not create that much of an impact on the climate or anything else with regards to the return on investment of what we have to spend.
Sure. Yeah, I think those who have to use the ferry systems on a regular basis
probably agree 100%. Yeah. I know they do, because it's not a partisan issue, and I've received so much feedback from people in the San Juans and all the people who are absolutely relying on it, businesses and people in medical, everything. and they're worried. As a matter of fact, I'm sitting on the new governor's subcommittee on transportation.
Oh, I didn't realize that. All right.
And we've had one meeting. We have another meeting next week, and then the final meeting will be in Whidbey Island to actually meet with a lot of people to talk just specifically about that. So we'll see if he actually, in this committee, commits to what he said during his campaign is a solution.
Very good. Very good. I'll be sure to reach out to you for an update on that. I'm very curious. I didn't know that was going on. Okay, so let's get to housing and rent control.
Sure.
So the rent control bill that ran last year, we know something similar, at least, if not an exact copy,
identical.
right, is going to be back probably in the first week or two of session.
Yep.
What's your kind of your thoughts on that with coming back so quickly?
Well, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, we knew this. They were very, very disappointed that we defeated it last year. They feel emboldened because two of the senators who were great to work with, that were moderate senators in the Senate, are not there anymore. And so they just think they automatically have the votes. I would disagree with that premise. And I can't wait to prove that as we get busy. Because I, too, have been working very hard over the interim, talking to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, right? With an emphasis on my Democrat colleagues, the ones who understand that this is really bad policy. They want an alternative. We're going to give them alternatives. They don't want this policy in place because they know it has a long-term negative effect on supply. And it's proven throughout the country. We've seen this. It's not my take on it. It's Harvard's take on it, right? It's economists' take on it.
Yep.
So, so first and foremost, we are firmly entrenched in doing everything we can to stop this bill. Secondarily, as you mentioned before, we started like a week after session working together. The coalition has been working together on bringing forth legislation, an RLTA task force, eviction reform, which is, I believe, even more pressing right now than stabilization.
Sure.
And to help those most in need, a tenant assistance program, a voucher program that we've talked about for years, but really actually putting in place the mechanism, the funding source, everything else, helping those who most need it. As the market stabilizes, rents are coming down already.
They sure are. Yeah.
Supply is actually starting to have some effect. Of course, we need a ton more supply, but the market is the market and it's adjusting. In my own business, rents are coming down. We're not doing rent increases. We have more units available to rent right now. This is great news for the market, right? This is absolutely great news. So I believe we have a lot to counter the narrative. I believe that there will be those in the majority that want to do something different. So we're going to give them some opportunities to do that. I had conversations just yesterday with some of my colleagues. We just finalized literally yesterday some of the last details on some of the policies. Now we're just waiting for them to go through the last little process in the legislature to actually have the bill in hand.
Sure.
So it will be challenging. The other piece is that we're finding out, and we just found this out recently, they're really stacking the decks, which they can do. And the way they do this, the majority is able to alter the number of members from each party on the certain committees. So in the Senate, which is usually our backstop, housing is usually a pretty balanced committee. I just heard that it's 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans. That's not a good thing. The Ways and Means, which is the most important because that's where everything kind of funnels through, it's way out of balance. So what they do is by putting more Democrats, they can afford to let some of their members off. So they don't have to vote yes. They can take a no vote. They're still covered on the yes vote to pass the policy. It's going to be more challenging to make sure that we have, people to counteract that. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. We got 105 days to fight this, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to do that.
You're speaking a little bit about the more specific pieces of legislation that you're working on. Maybe just start with maybe one of those, the attendant assistance program. RHA has been working with you and others on this, as you spoke about coalition. Would you maybe go through some of the kind of background on that bill? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about a voucher program for housing providers for years. There is tenant assistance programs out there, but they're just not in this vein. Our goal when we looked at this was, the argument has always been, well, the rents go up, people have to make critical decisions. Costs go up. They have to make a decision whether they buy their medication or whatever. And it could be $100 or $200 off. It could be that simple. Our goal was to create a very simple voucher program working through the housing authorities to create a portal that people can go in. They have to qualify for this. It's up to a certain max. I believe it's $400. I think that's what we agreed on. $400 for a year's period of time. They don't have to use it in sequence or consecutive.
Sure.
They can use it through a period like that. And it's there to help them bridge that gap. I've always said that, bridge that gap. So the framework of it's pretty simple. The funding mechanism is going to be the challenging part.
Sure.
Of course, as we're doing this 6 months ago, and now we have this, sky is falling, we have no money. Our goal or our methodology is to use the doc recording fee. So the doc recording fee is a fee that's been in place. The money goes in, it goes to counties and cities, but also various other things that work with homelessness, the home fund, etc. What we believe is that there is a perfect nexus here, and we're going to ask to redirect 20% of the money going into a specific fund to fund this voucher program. And then if we need to, we'll talk about backfilling that with some minor increases over the next 6 to 8 years.
Sure.
This is going to be necessary to do this, right? The challenge is going to be that with this budget cycle, right? So I'm already anticipating that they may be very open to this idea and concept, but there's probably going to be another tax over here that they'll say, we'll do this if you support this tax. It's going to be very difficult for myself, my colleagues, our caucus, to support any increases in taxes. We just, we've always been very, consistent on that, but really it's difficult when you have revenue. So I would argue, and we will argue, we just need to redirect the funds that exist and reprioritize those where they're going to do the greatest good. This program is that program. So we'll see if it gets through. I think we've crafted a really good policy. We threw a few out there the last couple of years to see if they'd stick. Didn't get a lot of traction on them, but it was a good counter narrative to rent stabilization, right? Because if you remember just the very aspect of rent stabilization, right? Say they cap it at 10%. What's everybody's rent going to get raised to?
9.9%.
Exactly. And so when the markets are doing that, why would you want to put that situation in play, right? As the units come up, there's no aspect, they can bump them up even higher. It will create more problem than solution in this marketplace. Let's help those that need the help. That's always been the premise of, one of the foundation of government. And when we all agree upon, to help those most in need. And I think if we put the great sideboards on this, make sure it is properly done, simple, make it so that it's a simple process to do that, but have the safeguards in place. I think this is a really good policy, and hopefully we'll get some traction.
Excellent. Yeah. We've very much enjoyed working on it, and very much looking forward to seeing where it goes. Something else, as you spoke about, is maybe even more important is eviction reform and tenant safety. And for those who don't, work every day in the housing industry, can you talk a little bit about what has really led to this piece of legislation?
Well, man, we broke the system. I mean, it's the bottom line. I was telling somebody the other day, again, I come from a perspective that's grounded in reality because I've been living it. And I literally remember not too many years ago, this is even before I was in the legislature, we used to have a 3-day pay or vacate. We had an eviction process. We had a notification process. And we went through that. And I used to brag all the time when I was out pitching and, and trying to market and gain new properties and clients. And I would say, I can literally show you on half a hand how many evictions we've done in the last year, right? And of those, maybe one would be an actual sheriff showing up evicting somebody, right? Because there was a process by which we worked together. We were able to get through these things and solve the problems before it ever got to the courts. Wasn't good enough. So when they changed all the policies, starting with the notifications, starting then adding just cause and everything else that's been on there, and then of course throw COVID into the mix, really screwed it up. You now have a system that's completely broken. It takes too long. People are able to stay in their units way too long. So much money is being lost. The effect is it is affecting all segments, including the affordable housing. We've seen this in Seattle, right?
Yeah.
We saw the whole affordable housing complex have to go to the city of Seattle and actually ask to be bailed out with a home fund
to the tune of, what was that, $14.5 million?
$14.5 million because they can't make their mortgage payments. Why? Because they can't collect the rent. So what we're saying, and I believe this actually will get some good traction because of the broad effect of it. We have to go back and look at it. We're not going to be able to throw everything out and start over. Love to, but we're not. Yeah. So we need to expedite the process in the courts. This bill starts with adding commissioners to the courts, specific commissioners to do that. This bill talks about the legal representation and the burden that should be not just be on the housing provider, but on the tenant that is going through the process. Mm-hmm. This bill adds some causes to allow for eviction, especially when it comes to safety. And what we've heard more and more, not even just on the non-payment of rent, is safety, criminal activity, gang activity, drug activity, really ramped up after COVID. I mean, we saw it during COVID, but the stories and the people I've talked to and the providers that are dealing with this, the way the law is now, you can't get somebody out. Yeah. So you're putting people at risk in these apartment complexes at all levels, affordable housing, state house, whatever it is, at risk. So this bill clearly does that. It doesn't throw everything out. It clarifies, it removes, and it simplifies the process. And in talking to one of my Democrat colleagues I've worked with very closely in the past, she actually said, we did this. We need to give the support to the courts. We don't need to throw the process or add more. We need to let the process actually work. I agree. I mean, if we've got this process in place, it needs to work, and it needs to work in an efficient, timely manner so as not to put it. When you're looking at situations where it could be 6-8 months to try to get some, that's incredible loss, okay? And lastly, I'll say, everybody's going to throw the statistic out there. Evictions have never been higher, right? Of course, filings have never been higher. We no longer have the option to work with somebody, to take a month or two to try to work or navigate through a process. We have to start the process immediately. We got to get in the queue. Everybody has to do that because the system is broken on how it works. So this piece, I think we just finalized the last little pieces on it. It's a big bill. It's like 38 pages long. It's a big one. Yeah. But I believe that this, I know there's another one being worked by a Democrat colleague through the majority. I think the two will coalesce and we will bring forth some solutions on it.
That's great to hear. You spoke about, even on the affordable housing side, you had a provider who owns a building in the International District in Seattle file a lawsuit with the city. I guess it was about a month and a half ago now, and show with concrete data, here's how the policies that have been put in place have broken what we were able to do here and keep our residents safe.
I tell you, I'm so glad that he did that. And when I saw that presentation, I've talked to him since, and we've been talking about this. This is what we need to do. Yeah, this is irrefutable. Right. Sometimes they talk about causation or correlation and these different, and that has no correlation to this. This is a completely, no, it is irrefutable. And I think it is also a broader model that can be applied to almost everything.
Sure.
If you talk about housing, and again, we didn't wake up one day and go, oh my gosh, we're 1 million houses short. No, for 30 years, we have created policy around the Growth Management Act and all these other things. If you did that exact same model and lined up those policies and put it in place, you'd see that. Transportation, exactly the same thing. What's causing the cost? So when we look at that, the thing has to be that common sense must prevail on both sides of the aisle. People must look at it, and we need to agree. Okay, we had some good intentions here. We thought we were protecting these different things, but it's out of balance. And you cannot refute that these policies in place have created the problem that we're in. And one of the things I hear that just drives me nuts, right? Sorry, I'm a little tangent.
No.
But the thing is this. So here's a solution from the extreme, right? In that model also, what you find is that housing providers, once they get those units back, are not putting them back on the market. That particular property, I think the total was like 100 units over the course of the last year or two. They're sitting on it. So you've decreased supply because housing providers are so worried about the system and they don't want to take the risk again. Yeah. They can't afford it. So the extreme option or the extreme alternative is to penalize that housing provider by taxing them on a vacant unit.
Yeah.
By saying, we're going to tax you unless you rent that unit. That's complete. I can't even say it, but you know what I'm thinking.
Yes,
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Right? It's crazy. So let's not do that. Let's fix it.
Yeah.
Let's all agree that we can look on it and say, hey, let's fix it. It's a good segue into the last bill, and that's the RLTA task force bill.
Yeah.
Because ultimately what we need to do is take a holistic look at what has been done and what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. Instead of this piecemeal approach of let's do this bill this session, let's go after this protection, let's add this, blah, blah, blah. We need to just get everybody together, right? Low-income housing folks, the developers, housing providers of all shapes and sizes. Bring them together. And I'm happy to say that I'm working with the Lieutenant Governor Heck, who has been instrumental in bringing groups together. He was instrumental in the housing supply, middle housing, all the things we did. He and I have had some very good conversations, meeting again next week. That bill is drafted, ready to go. I have a potential Democrat co-sponsor on it. We're going to look at this and bring it together. And whatever comes out of that group, we can then look at to put into policy. And I think it will set the tone for the next 20, 25 years, right? Let's do it right. One of the key sticking points that everybody's going to freak out about, we need to bring this back to the state level. We need to have consistency in implementation.
Absolutely. We
cannot have a state policy in every jurisdiction under the sun having another policy that counters, because it's creating, again, an environment of inconsistency, an environment that is making it very difficult for housing providers to do what it is that we need to do. And if we truly are in a supply crisis and we should be doing everything possible to encourage building development
100%.
And housing providers to bring forth everything to the market. As I said on a panel the other day, I said, I don't know what got flipped on its head. I don't know when it became that housing providers were eviction machines. My company is not called Hometown Eviction Services, right? It's property management.
Yep.
I mean, my job is to put people in houses and to help them stay in those houses for as long as they need to, and to do that over and over and over again. We don't want to evict people. We don't want to have issues, but if we do have those issues, we should be able to take care of them.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I actually have a chart on my wall in my office of all the different laws and all the different jurisdictions across the state, and it kind of makes me go cross-eyed when I look at it. It's too much.
Unreal. And Woodinville, I think, of all places, just dropped one the other day.
Yep.
And I read through it, and it's like they want to one-up each other. They've added a few more things.
Yep.
But they don't understand the consequences, or whether they're intended or unintended.
Yep.
And I'll give you a real quick example. Olympia did this last year. Put these in place. We want to work with everybody. So if you come and apply to us and you meet the standards, but say you come in and say, hey, I just went through a bad divorce. My credit has been taking a hit, but everything else is pretty good. I'm not going to meet your criteria. We'd say, well, let's run it. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
I can talk to my owner. I can make some exceptions of variation, but usually what we'll do is what we call adverse action, right? So a double deposit minimizes the risk to the owner. It gives a little more security.
Sure.
And then we can go back to that prospect and say, and they may say, I don't know if I can put that together. Well, the law says I can work with you on payments. I can help you find resources, but we want to do it. The new law that we see, Woodinville, Olympia, and everything else, says you can no longer charge anything more than 1 month's rent for any kind of security deposit. So you eliminated adverse action. So guess what? We can't rent to a significant portion of the population any of the properties that we have in Olympia if you have that type of situation. They eliminated it. And when we went back and told them, they're like, what? We didn't realize that would. We're like, yeah, it's called adverse action, and you just took that out. And every time you do this, the standards go higher. So now it's not equitable. They love that. Yep. It's not equitable. You're taking and eliminating the ability for people to get into housing, right? And so, it's just example after example after example. The task force, you bring all that together. You look at it statewide. You look at what needs to be done, and you have the hard conversation and say, is that necessary? Or would it be better if we allowed X, Y, or Z? Mm-hmm. You agree upon it, policy, put it into play. I think it's the best way to do it, and I'm hoping that we can get that one through.
You had another bill that you put forward last year about lot splitting and being able to build more in that way. And actually, you mentioned something about costs of building and everything. I was speaking with Representative Mari Levitt, I don't know, 5 or 6 months ago, and she was astounded that when new builds, a lot of times one of the top 10 costs when you see it on their kind of spreadsheets is permitting.
Yeah.
And I thought that was completely wild when you consider what the actual cost to build everything is. But that just sort of rolling that into your lot splitting and trying to build more housing. Are you planning on bringing lot splitting?
It's ready to go.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah.
Hopefully, third time's a charm. That bill's passed unanimous off the floor day one last year, and then it just got hung up in the Senate. So what we did is we worked over the interim with the issues that were brought forth on it. And I think one of the key pieces that we've incorporated into it that I think will help is it really speaks to the subdivision laws that, when you talk about subdividing and everything else, one of the pushbacks was that you can split a lot, but unless it meets the right criteria, it may not be buildable. And so part of the theory is it's called buyer beware. You've got to make sure. But if you incorporate some of the pieces and mix it in with a subdivision and clarify, it basically says, yes, you have this ability to split this lot. However, it must be done in a way that produces a lot that can be built upon.
Right.
And so it takes all the gray area out. And when you say that, that's water, that's sewer, that's egress, regress, that could be whatever, that the requirements. And that was always the pushback. Well, you're just going to do that and you won't be able to do these different things. I'm hoping that it's the right solution because truly it is a central piece of the housing supply bills we did a couple of years ago.
Sure.
It is a masterful way to allow for immediate increase of supply. It also allows for people to create generational wealth, create the mother-in-law unit, ADUs, whatever it might be. There are a lot of lots throughout the area where this would work really, really well. So I'm encouraged. I think we've got the right mix. I've talked to all the stakeholders. We'll see how it gets through. I don't see a problem getting it through in the House again. But as you know, you start over.
Right.
So I've got to get a hearing. I've got to be able to get it through and get it exec, get it to the floor, get it passed, get it to the Senate, and work that whole process again. But I know it is a priority. It's on everybody's priority list, including the governor, including the governor-elect, I should say, and lieutenant governor, because it's a big piece. There are other supply bills. I know that one of my colleagues now, Senator-elect Bateman, she's going to be the new chair of housing.
Yes.
Kind of excited about that.
Yeah.
We work really well together. And I know she's working on a lot of things, whether it's around parking and some other things that are still sticking points. But I told her in our meeting, I said, I don't think it's a matter of just introducing more legislation and policy. We got to make sure that the policy that we have right now is working. And I think the bigger thing, as you said when you started the segment, we need to look at the things that are existing that are inhibiting these policies from going into play. Impact fees, permits, permit timelines, regulatory. Let's talk about natural gas, building code council, everything else that's on there. I think a statistic I saw here recently, and it's going to get updated before session, it was well over $100,000 a unit in regulatory and local costs. That's before you do anything. That's not a piece of wood. That's not turning a spade of dirt. That's just the process. So that's broken. So we need to, I think the focus should be, let's dig into what's already there and see if we can't fix that.
Exactly. Love it. Well, Representative Andrew Barkis, thank you so much for joining Housing Matters yet again. And I'd love to, we'll do these throughout session and kind of get updates on what's going on. And hopefully we are able to get some of this legislation passed and work with both sides of the aisle. But I very much appreciate your time.
Yeah, you bet. Well, it's always a pleasure to work with you guys. I really appreciate the work over the last several months with RHA. It's been fantastic. I love the coalition that we have with our other partners at bringing everybody together on this particular issue. And definitely you can track me through my website. All of our communications start back up through session. This is a long session, 105 days.
Yes.
Go all the way through April. People can reach out to me and come see me. And hopefully we'll do this on a regular basis to keep people updated on what's going on. And the other thing is, I would just say a call to action. Okay?
Absolutely.
The call to action to all your members and everybody else is pay attention, follow what's going on, get involved in the process, write, testify, make your voice heard, because it's not me. It's everybody collectively that's going to help impact and bring this policy to fruition.
Absolutely. We've been telling our members, please don't unsubscribe. You're going to be getting possibly 2 or 3 emails a day from us. So please don't delete them. Don't unsubscribe. Read them. Call to action. Because as you said, their voice is extremely important. So
it is absolutely important. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for listening to my interview with Representative Andrew Barkis. I hope you found it insightful and educational, and hopefully it gives a little bit of insight on what RHA and the housing industry hopes to accomplish in this year's legislative session. Speaking of this year's legislative session, keep an eye on your inbox. You're going to be getting a lot of information from RHA on how you can help advocate and make your voice heard in Olympia this year. You'll be getting, honestly, too many emails from us, so please make sure that you read those. There's going to be a lot of important information in those about how you can sign up to testify at hearings, or whether you can just sign in as pro or con to a particular bill. And there will also be some information in there on how you can email your lawmakers and express your opinion about certain bills. Also, keep an eye out for news and video updates from yours truly. I'll be putting out a kind of update from Olympia every 2 weeks or so during session. In those updates, I'll have interviews with various elected officials and interviews with RHA members, and just try to give you a picture of what has been going on down here in Olympia every week to keep everyone updated on any housing industry news. Not a member of RHA? RHA is the premier housing provider resource in Washington State. Our membership includes leasing forms and notices that are continually updated by real estate attorneys. You'll find a fantastic selection of educational classes to help you better run your business and understand local regulations. Also, want to get involved in advocacy? Check out the RHA Advocacy Center for important local and state legislative updates and how you can make your voice heard. If you have a story or topic you believe should be covered on a future episode of Housing Matters, send me an email at chjalseth@rhawa.org. I'd be happy to hear from you. The views expressed in episodes of RHAWA's Housing Matters podcast do not necessarily represent the views and policies of the Rental Housing Association of Washington. Formal legal advice and review is recommended prior to selection and use of this information. RHAWA does not represent your selection or execution of this information as appropriate for your specific circumstance. The material contained and represented herein, although obtained from reliable sources, is not considered legal advice or to be used as a substitution for legal counsel. Copyright 2025.